Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartophilus.
Well, welcome back, basketball fans. You are listening to the NTC podcast. This is a No Trade Clause team. We are back with episode 9. It's a new season, so we figured it'd be a great time to dive into some new content and bring the podcast back for you guys. So me and my buddy John Hartophilus here are going to be just kind of alternating hosting this podcast over the duration of the season and beyond, bringing you guys some content from the CBA aspect of things with salaries and things like that, signings, and then also the on-court portion. So the things you might talk about on Twitter and in your social circles and things like that. So we're going to tackle both sides of it. But you know how we do at No Trade Clause. We're all about the numbers, the salaries, all that good stuff. We're going to bring you all the details. Have no worries about that whatsoever. But John, man, I'm excited to have you on this podcast. Glad to have you on this team. We've done some episodes before, but this is John's first entry into No Trade Clause, and we're glad to have him on. So, John, I'm really excited for this, man. It's been a long time coming, getting the podcast back in action, but excited to get back to talking basketball and to have you a part of the team, man. So I'm excited, and I'm sure you're raring to go as well.
This is going to be special. I mean, Aaron, thank you so much for this. This platform is incredible. The No Trade Clause team is awesome. I met all of you guys at Summer League. I'd never met you guys before, and you guys have just been so welcoming to me. To be able to do this with you is really special. And I mean, we just going through all this is going to be a lot of fun, especially this first episode today. We have some good topics cooked up and an exciting NBA 75th season upon us to really dive into.
Absolutely. So what you guys could look forward to is me and John kind of, like I said, alternating, and we're going to be bringing in special guests from really across the league. So you might see people in the front office, you might see a scout, you might see a coach. You never know who's going to be popping in on our podcast going forward. So be sure to keep it locked every week for a new episode. And we're going to be really just tackling what's going on in the NBA today, what's trending, and just what's really relevant. So just keep it locked and just be sure to look forward to that as we continue to dive into these podcast episodes as we go throughout the season. So John, today is a good day, man, because we get to talk about a few teams that are really kind of just setting the league on fire so far for different reasons. Some of these are good reasons, some of them are bad, but whatever the case may be, they're hot topics. And we wanted to kind of restart this podcast with a focus on a few teams that are really making waves in the NBA. So I wouldn't call this a preview because we've started already, but what we really just want to do is kind of just set the stage for what's going on in the NBA right now. So we're going to catch you guys up. We're going to dive into some numbers. We're going to dive into some storylines and really just catch you guys up on what's going on in the league today. So let's go ahead and start us off, man. Like, why don't we just start with the Lakers? Because it seems like
talk about storylines.
Yeah, man. Like, who doesn't want to talk about the freaking Lakers? Like, you got one of the great ensembles of previous all-stars that we've ever seen in the league today. You go down the list: Melo, LeBron, AD, DeAndre Jordan. You have all these all-NBA appearances, all-star appearances. So like, what can go wrong, right? All these great names. Like, this is going to be great.
What can go wrong is a great question, because a good amount's gone wrong to start it off. I mean, we've all seen the graphics all summer long, right? With all the graphics, number one, you mentioned the All-NBA teams, the All-Star teams, the number of points. LeBron has more minutes played than the entire Thunder roster, right? Like stuff like that that just jumps off the page, and you're like, how is that even possible? How does the math make sense? And it does. Or the pictures of the 2015 All-Star game and Lakers and the Nets, and talking about those two teams. But there's a lot to go into here. But to start the season off, they've been when we're talking about storylines, more like headlines. They're all over. They're everywhere. You're always looking at the Lakers because of whether it's shooting inefficiencies or lost games or fights on the side of the bench. There's always something going on. But looking at the numbers, I know, I mean, the first thing we have to talk about is, I mean, the reason a lot of these numbers are the way they are is because they're injury issues, with 5 guys on the injury report already, and AD's questionable, so who knows what might happen there. Yeah. But that's a big part about it. And I mean, we can definitely talk forever about some of these splits or some of these guys that maybe haven't just got enough to the right foot to start the season.
Yeah, it's been kind of a slow start for them, man. And honestly, I'm not surprised when you bring in these high caliber players that are some of these guys like Westbrook are used to commanding a large part of the offense. Obviously, you're going to have growing pains. That's what we're seeing. I mean, it was very evident the other night when they played the Thunder in OKC and they blew a 26-point lead. I didn't catch the whole game, but that fourth quarter was an actual circus, just to put it plainly. And you just see a lack of focus, a lack of communication, concentration, things like that. Of course, they're a veteran team, but you bring in a lot of new pieces. Because you think about who was on this title team when they won, the 2020 championship, there's not many guys left, honestly. Almost everyone is gone. So it's a new era for Lakers basketball. But I mean, the big headline for this team specifically has been Westbrook's play. His shooting splits are atrocious once again. It makes you want to, just kind of duck and cover, just looking at those numbers. But lowest points per game average right now since the second season in the league. His shooting splits are pretty atrocious at 44, 20, 50. So I mentioned this on my podcast the other day, but I have no idea what happened to his free throw percentage. That's just continues to just confuse me. But they did rebound last night against the Cavaliers, so we have to give him credit for that bounce back win. And shout out to Melo, 3 to the dome, because he's rebounding and he's embracing his role as a catch and shoot guy. And he's out. He put up 24 points last night. So it's a great team, man. And there's going to be more ups and downs. But I think as they start to figure it out, they're really going to be a force in the Western Conference.
There's not many teams that, outside of maybe the 2017 Warriors, that figure like these super teams with all this talent come together to figure it out right away and win games right away. Right. I mean, whether it's the Heat back in the early 2010s, or some of these other teams, it really takes about a season sometimes, if not a little bit more. This team showing us that. And thank you for shouting out Melo. Me being a New Yorker and having some fond memories of him back in his glory days with the New York Knicks. But thinking about how he's finding his role a little bit. I mean, he found it in Portland a little bit. He was starting to get his groove there. And if he can continue that in the Lakers, that's a good sign for them. But yeah, like you said, with Westbrook's shooting inefficiencies and some other guys on the team maybe not living up to the expectations that they had as these once all-star, once high-level players, we'll see how they're able to navigate that, because their cap situation, like we may have mentioned, isn't maybe the best for a couple of years down the line if the season doesn't work out.
Yeah, man. I mean, diving into the cap numbers for a second, they're heavily invested in this core. They did get some bargains in free agency, such as Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn. Those guys combined are making, just under $7 million. So, kudos to the front office for securing 2 high upside guards for, a very small salary. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have Westbrook, James, and Davis. You put those numbers together. I mean, you're looking at $130 million between 3 players. So, I mean, definitely a lot of money there. Maybe not 130, my math is I wasn't great at math, so I'll put that out there right now. That's my excuse. But it's a lot of money, man. You're talking, around $100 million for those guys. And then it's not like they're coming off the books immediately. Westbrook does have a player option for next year, but he's not leaving. I mean, this is where he wants to be. This is where he always, I think, wanted to be. I mean, at least for a long time. So yeah, they definitely invested a lot of resources, but they're going to have to redo this roster next year, because you start at Ariza and you look at all the minimum contracts they have here, there's going to be a lot of turnover from year to year because they're trying to fill out that bottom half of the roster. So it will be interesting to follow this team as they continue to just try to reinforce the back end around LeBron and Davis. And we'll see how many years they can get out of this title run. With James and Westbrook not getting any younger, the time is now. They have to strike while the iron is hot. And it's going to be interesting to see how long they can keep it up and which of these young guys, THT or maybe Kendrick Nunn, they keep around for more than one season. It's going to be an interesting story, to say the least, man. So we'll see where they go from here. Do you feel like they have a legitimate chance to win the championship, or are you a skeptic like me thinking that they're going to bow out in the first or second round this year?
I'm probably more leaning towards that skeptic side. What I think is very important is what you mentioned about that bottom half of the roster. That's, especially with such an old team, that bottom half of the roster is crucial if you're going to make a deep run. Because think about it, all the guys are getting hurt now, and we're on game 5, 6, 7. And what's going to happen when we start getting to 50, 60? It's going to get rough, Aaron. I'm sorry. It's going to get really rough out there. Absolutely. When that bottom half of the roster isn't up to speed.
It really isn't, man. It really isn't. So, I mean, Riza, I don't think he's hardly played yet. Ellington's maybe played a game or two. Malik Monk, Malik Monk has been pretty solid, but I do want to give a shout out real quick here to Avery Bradley and Austin Reeves. Honestly, Austin Reeves might be the next Caruso. Like, I don't want to jinx it, but he's been pretty solid, man. So shout out to the Lakers for finding those hidden gems. They really know how to fill the back end of the roster. Those are kind of like they're the hidden gems of the Lakers. So keep an eye on those guys too, for sure. They're going to make some noise, at least until those other rotation players get back on the roster.
All you need is that one opportunity. And we're talking about this team, right, being a little bit on the older side and all that, but one team that it's also in the West that's making big moves and maybe might have the best young superstar in the league, if not one of the top three. And John Morant, we were talking about the Grizzlies a little bit before we got on the show, Aaron, and how he's really putting the league on notice, tying Steph for leading the league in scoring. Like that's pretty impressive thing about a team where really going into the last year maybe didn't have the highest expectations about them, and now they're looking like a legitimate playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, I pegged them as the 8th seed again from last year, but if Ja keeps playing like this, man, their ceiling is higher, definitely higher than 8th. They can, find themselves, in the top half of the play-in scenario. They might even be able to kind of avoid it completely if he is an MVP candidate the whole season. And I mean, think about this. They haven't had Dylan Brooks at all yet in through their first few games. So very impressive stuff. And do you see John Morant as a top 5 PG, or does he have a little bit more to go before he really creeps into the absolute elites of the league guard category?
I think that to be in that top, when you start getting that kind of elite consideration, you have to get it done in the playoffs. And he kind of did that, even though they weren't winning games. Maybe he was putting on a show in the playoffs last year. He's shown that he could do it over and over and over again. He hasn't really had too many huge slumps in his, albeit very short. Hasn't really played almost all of his seasons have been cut short due to COVID or in some way. So he hasn't really played a full 82 game season yet. But he's still putting on a show at every single turn. There really hasn't been a bad thing you could say about him, whether it's on the court or off it or anything like that. So I think he's getting there. If he's not there yet, he very well will be by the end of the season. If he keeps this up, maybe a little bit higher than that.
I mean, I'm right with you on that train of thought. I think he's knocking on the door, and that jump shot is really unlocking a part of his game that kind of shows us that he can be one of the great point guards in this league. He's not just a battering ram. He's not just this acrobat that floats into the paint. He can make your jaw drop in different ways, which includes a 3-point shot. It looks pretty legit so far. So I'm very impressed by what John Morant has seen so far. And, it's exciting for this entire roster because aside from John Morant and Jaren Jackson, there are a lot of lower drafted players on this team. You go and look around and you see the DeAnthony Meltons and the Tyus Jones of the world, Brandon Clark, Desmond Bane. A lot of these guys are very solid players, but they're older coming out of the draft. They were second rounders. They were slept on. And then the Grizzlies just find these diamonds in the rough and they really transform them into very solid contributors for this team. So I love that part for them. I love that aspect for them. And, I can't wait to see how they continue to develop because they're NBA ready. And I think teams today are sleeping on the fact that there's nothing wrong with drafting a guy that's 21 or 22 if he's going to be an immediate contributor and maybe his upside is lower. But if you want to be competitive in the next year or two, they're going to go a long way towards making that happen. So the Grizzlies do that better than almost any other team out there. It's very impressive.
Definitely, and we've been talking a lot of positives about them, but still, when it comes to that Jaren Jackson Jr. deal, how do you feel about that? Wrapping your mind around the money they put towards someone that only played 11 games last year.
I got
hasn't looked. Yeah, you have a lot to say. I know you have a lot to say about that. I'm saying that's a rhetorical question. I know you have a lot to say about that. Didn't play a lot of games last year. Hasn't been really hit a groove this year. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Man, when he signed that deal, I was very hesitant to kind of giving a passing grade or give it a positive grade. Of course he can be worth it. He has the potential to live up to it. 4 years, $105 million. That's no small number. And for Jaren Jackson, I mean, he's been short circuited by injury pretty much for 2 years now straight. And, it doesn't matter how good you are, man. If you can't stay on the court, it doesn't matter. And I hear it all the time. People say one of the best abilities in basketball or just sports in general is availability. And I think that rings true for Jaren Jackson. I honestly think if he stays healthy, he's worth every penny. I'll put it out there right now because I've been on record saying I think he can be the best long distance big man shooter in history. I'll put it out there, man. I'm not afraid to say it. So I think he can have a really positive impact for a winning team, but there's still some holes in this game he's got to fill. He's got to be a better interior defender. He's got to be less prone to foul. He's got to be more consistent from night to night and not just, have the roller coaster. I need to see more from that, more leadership qualities from him if he's going to live up to this. There's still time. I'm just hesitant, man. Like, I've been traumatized by injuries to my favorite players and fantasy teams. So when I see guys get big deals like that, I wince a little bit because I'm just scared that they're not going to return that investment. But he could, because I love Jaren Jackson. I think he has the tools to be a great player.
Only time will tell how that actually plays out. But one deal, maybe, and we were talking about this before we got on, that's maybe looking pretty good for the Grizzlies side of things, is the Valanciunas and Steven Adams deal. I mean, I know you had some thoughts about that going on from the podcast you did the other day, but that's something where, I mean, everyone maybe brace themselves and maybe not even knowing too much about the value of these two big men. We know all about the big men that can shoot from three, and that have all those skills, like the Karl Anthony Towns of the world, the Joel Embiid of the world, the Nikola Jokic's of the world. But these guys like Steven Adams and they do all the dirty work, kind of go unnoticed, and it bothers me, man. I gotta be honest, it bothers me that these guys don't get the appreciation that they deserve.
They don't. Ring it loud, man. Ring it loud for the rooftops. Let these people know that Aquaman is not to be taken lightly. He's coming out here this season, starting fast through 5 games, 11 points, 10 boards, 3 assists. This is something I mentioned on my podcast the other day. 3 assists, man, no small feat for Steven Adams. It's very impressive. And, looking at his, career stats for as far as assists, I mean, this is a career high. His previous career high was 2.3. So he's dishing that rock a little bit. And, a lot of people criticized the trade, jettisoning Valanciunas for bringing in Adams. So far, it works because he does kind of plant himself in the paint, but there's enough shooting in other positions. Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bane, D'Anthony Melton. I think you can survive with having like a big that's based in the paint. If all the other guys can shoot, there's enough spacing there. So he's coming out here. He's averaging a double-double. He's dishing the rock. He's efficient. He's just doing his job. He's a garbage man. I mean, garbage men don't get a lot of recognition, Nobody glamorizes that, but they're essential. We need those people. So that's how I look at Adams. And that's why I think, it was a great transaction for them. But going forward, man, I'm really just looking forward to seeing how they kind of manage these contracts that they have on the books with, John Morant's going to get a big deal soon. Jaren Jackson just got his raise. Dylan Brooks, I think, is one of the best bargains right now in the NBA as far as a contract value. And they have some money to play with. I mean, they're nowhere near the tax. It's going to change as the years go on. So I want to see how they kind of manage these other guys on the roster, who gets traded, who gets cut, because cap space, it's going to happen like the Hawks, where every year it starts to do this until you're into the tax. But I think at that point, they should be like, if not a contender, they should be right there because they're making their necessary moves. And, their front office is just pretty smart and they're improving every year. I think they're going to be just as good, if not better, win-wise as last season. And that's worth watching, especially for a team like this that's pretty young and that has a rich heritage of grinding and winning a lot of games. So I'm excited for them.
A rich history of grit and grind. But I love how you brought up the assist numbers, because I would even challenge that a little bit further and say he should have, if you were to count screens, the amount of assists he gives off of his screens bumps that number up tremendously. He's passing that route, but he's also setting guys up with this. I mean, so many guys have been on record talking about Steven Adams' screens. There's videos of Steph Curry getting floored by his screens and stuff. A lot of guys like that. So that's a huge part of it. Those are those little things that go unnoticed. And the stats maybe don't tell the whole story. And that's why we need to come on here and talk about that. But let's move over actually a little bit more to another team. And you're going to like this one when talking about guys that maybe don't put up the numbers, but they're still impacting winning, like a Steven Adams. But talk about Kyle Lowry, man, on this new Heat team. That's got I see you get So for those that can't see it, Aaron's rubbing those hands together. He's ready for this one. He's cracking his knuckles. He's ready to go because he might be right. When you look at the numbers, he was averaging 17 points per game last year, just over 6 points per game this year. But the team that he's on right now is winning much more than the team he was on last year in terms of the Raptors. I'm gonna leave the floor to you though. You got to tell us what's going on with this Heat team.
The Heat are just doing what they do best, man. They're just they're living embodiment of just tough-minded, dig down, gritty type players, man. Like bringing in PJ, re-signing Deadman, just bringing in, Kyle Lowry. It just further instills that just sense of just grit and just toughness, man. And currently the Heat are one of the best defensive teams in the league. They're holding pretty much every opponent so far to under 100 points, which is very impressive in today's NBA, where 120, 130 points is pretty commonplace. And specifically with Kyle Lowry, I want to give him a shout out because you mentioned it, 6 points a game. Kyle Lowry, 6 points a game. You look at that and say, this man is garbage. But I think we flip the script a little bit and we look at what he does as far as the intangibles. Very impressive. He's coming in, he's pushing the pace. The Heat have historically been a very slow-paced team, but now you can see that they're getting more transition opportunities in early offense. He's a three-point threat, which stretches the floor for Jimmy and Bam, which is very monumental for their scoring opportunities. And then guys like PJ Tucker and Dedmon are crashing the boards. So the Heat, they were a very weak defensive or a very weak rebounding team last season. Now they're one of the best. They out-rebounded Charlotte by a huge margin. I can't remember exactly what it is, like 18 or something like that. They're in their last game. So they turned a weakness into a strength. And then guys like Bam and Tyler Hero are taking those leaps up to all-star level and higher, which is very impressive. So, I've seen a lot of great things from the Heat. Their defense has been stifling. I think they'll be a top 5 defensive team the whole season. And I think Jimmy Butler's going to be in the MVP conversation. I think Bam is going to be, if not defensive player of the year, top 3, because his opponents are only shooting 21% from the field when he's guarding them. And he leads the league in defensive win shares. He already has 1.3. So that's my shout out to Bam and the Heat team. I could go on for days, but suffice to say that I'm very impressed with their play so far. And as a fan, I'm excited. And I think they're a dark horse to break back into the finals. That's how good I think this team is so far.
I won't bring up the Knicks so we don't get too biased takes on this show. But no, definitely you are on the right track with this, because the Heat are definitely a team that right now is making a lot of moves. And it's putting themselves in a position to where maybe, who knows, maybe they could do that. And you didn't even bring up Tyler Hero as much as I thought, and I thought you would, because he's been balling, man. He was getting a lot of hate on social media before and over the last year or so. And he's one of those younger guys that definitely is on it. Like he's right. He's one of the cooler guys in the league that like check that's on that stuff. So he definitely heard it and he's responding.
He told people, man, he was on social media and he's like, I think people are sleeping on me. I'm going to show them. And he's followed it up. He's walking the walk, talking the talk. So he put it out there. He warned people. So this should not be a surprise if people were really watching his social presence. So he's in the gym, man. The results are definitely showing themselves right now. I love it.
So I'm going to switch us over then to a team that maybe didn't really warn everyone this was going to happen. This kind of came out of nowhere. Last year, the Wizards lost their first 6 games, and it was like red alert, right? Everyone was bracing for trades and blowing the team up and what's going to happen. We had the privilege of listening to Tommy Shepard at SBC this summer. So such a great human being. And I love that he's getting his respect now that he made a trade that changed the Wizards' hopes completely for the next 2-3 years when he dealt Westbrook, a 2024 second-round pick, a 2028 second-round pick to the Lakers for Kuzma, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, and the 22 pick that through a few trades it gets very confusing here, but it ended up becoming Aaron Holiday. Everyone looked at that and said, okay, wow, you're giving up Westbrook, someone that, a $40 million a year player, all this great stuff. What are you really getting back? Kuzma, who's an IG meme or some stuff like that. But I mean, this Wizards team, they're starting off the season 4-1. Kuz is averaging 14 and 12. Trez is at 18 and 9, shooting 68% from the field. KCP at 9 points per game with 42% from 3. 4 Wizards, including so those 3 guys, including Beal, scored 20 points in their Game 5 win. All 4 of them. So it's a team effort. This team's playing together. And Tommy Shepard, man, give that man his respect.
Major props to Tommy on this one. For the roster he's built here. I think trying to get off of I would say a negative value contract in Westbrook, you can't really do much better than this. You get multiple impact players, great rotation players that can be starters or bench guys, fill a multitude of roles. You got your shot creator in Kuzma, you got your shooter in Caldwell Pope, your 3-and-D guy, you got your grinder, you got your hustle rebounder in Harrell. You cover all the bases in the trade. So I love what he was able to get back. I love what they did in the draft, getting, Corey Kispert, another shooter to kind of help out Beal and those guys, Beal and Dinwiddie that love to attack the paint. So honestly, man, I think Tommy and the Wizards are doing a great job right now of because sometimes you make decisions that don't turn out the best, but what you have to do as a front office, individual manager is how do you rebound from that? I've seen that multiple times with Pat Riley and the Heat, bad contracts, they flip them into positive contracts. The Wizards have done the same here. So it's bearing out in the numbers. They They're doing some great things right now. I mean, there's some log jams here and there, but I mean, that's to be expected when you have so much depth. So I think as this year goes on and into next year, they'll kind of figure out who they want to keep. And then we'll see with Beal, man, because he has a player option next year for $36 million that he could turn down and be a free agent. So the clock is ticking, but the Wizards are doing everything they can here to give the Beal hope that he's gonna, or give themselves hope that Beal is gonna stay. So 4-1 so far. I'm impressed. I'm surprised a little bit. They deserve some credit because they have a lot of depth, and they're gonna be one of those teams that's gonna give you a run for your money, no doubt.
It's funny you said that. I like the analogy you said of the clock is ticking, because it is at the same time, but they're not really scrambling right now to like fix it, right? Like last year you might have felt that maybe it's panic mode, but right now it feels like, okay, like there's like, let's revisit this in 2-3 months and see what's going on here. Because honestly, if they're up at those standings a little bit more than that, now we start thinking, okay, what could this team do a year from now? What could their draft picks look like? Then that's when the two of us are sitting here looking at their cap saying, where do we go from here? Because honestly, that might give themselves a position to actually make some noise, which that's kind of thinking about last year, they were 0-6. You would never have thought that would have happened this year. So
right.
It's cool seeing how those turnarounds can happen, and positive. And there could be some positive, just a month to month almost. Another team. So we keep on transitioning almost seamlessly because so many of these teams have this same narrative and about they really cashed in over the summer. They didn't sit packed. They made some serious change to the roster, whether it's through trade or through the draft or through free agency. And they were seeing some benefits to it now. And maybe it wasn't looked at as being super positive on the day it got signed or the day it happened. But these GMs, these execs know what they're doing. They're the top 30 in the world. And they're building some pretty high quality teams. So moving over to the Cavs, who are now 3-2, they've beaten the Hawks, the Nuggets, and the Clippers. 3 teams that a lot of us would say are of those upper echelon teams in the NBA. They're not beating any non-playoff teams right there.
Right.
So right off the bat, they're winning games that right most people maybe wouldn't think they'd be winning. They have guys like Jared Allen who got paid this summer, $100 million over the course of 5 years. Everyone thought that was a bad contract. We were sitting there at Summer League with the Cavs roster saying, what do we do with all these bigs? But if you have guys that could play, maybe it will work out. And that's what it seems like it's happening now, because he's having some monster games. You're talking about a 21-16 game on 10 of 11 shooting. That's the first 20-15 game on over 90% shooting since he did that last year on February 24th. And that was the first time he did it since anyone did it, since he did it on February 21st of last year. So Jared Allen has a knack for these big rebound games on a super high efficiency. All those games with the Cavs.
I love it.
Right, you gotta love it. I mean, right, and everyone was talking really down on that deal that Kobe Allman made, but it looks like it's turning out well for them, because if he and not even to mention this, everyone was saying, how do the bigs fit in with each other? Mobley's balling out too, so you have 2 young bigs. Everyone kind of forgets how young Jared Allen is. It feels like he's been in the league for forever. I feel like I grew up watching him even though I didn't. It feels like it feels like he's been on the Nets for like 7-8 years, and that's just not true. But like, that fro is kind of just like I feel like that fro maybe adds a few years to his NBA career. But right, thinking about how Mobley's balling out too, 14-9 and 2 blocks a game. 2 blocks a game in this league right now, that like 2.5 will lead the league in blocks at this day and age. This isn't the 80s and 90s when Hakeem was having 4.8. Like this is in 2021, 2 blocks a game is pretty solid. And he's young. He's getting a name for himself in the rotation. Man, this Cavs team, and we can talk about the guards now too. I mean, there's so much here that maybe didn't look so promising over the summer. Now after the first few games, definitely have to see more. But we're like, maybe they did have something figured out here. Maybe they do have the young pieces they need to have something special going on here in Cleveland.
Yeah, John. I mean, the big obstacle for the Cavs to kind of push themselves forward in their development was that special player. It's been lacking. I mean, Colin Sexton, love Colin Sexton. Got to meet the guy a few years ago. He's a dog, the young bull. He's not a franchise player. I'd also say the same about Garland. They're both great players, but they're not the guys that you're going to give max contract. You know, they're going to make all-star, all-NBA teams. They're not quite in that tier of player.
Tell to Colin Sexton in the summer. I don't know. He might be getting paid, but
he's getting paid all right.
He's getting paid.
I would say a max, but he's getting paid. Yep. He's the Brinks truck will be at his house next summer. You can count on it. But I think their fortunes are changing when it comes to the franchise player, because Mobley could be that guy for them. Going into the draft, I mean, everybody hyped up his defense, which has been just as good as advertised. And knock on him was his offense. You know, he's slight. He's not going to be able to bang with the bigs. You know, he's a little bit unrefined as far as his offensive game goes, but he shows signs of a jumper. You know, he's very sound defensively, has great timing. And, you know, people talked about for years is Porzingis, you know, ex-Knicks guy. there. I'm sure that might bring up a few bad memories of his tenure there. He is one of those guys. It's like he's the unicorn. He's he's such a special player, and he is. What if Evan Mobley is the true unicorn? Because you think about what he can do. He can guard guards. He could guard centers. Well, not centers yet. He's kind of thin, but he can guard bigger guys. He can run the floor. He's going to be able to shoot the ball pretty soon. I'm sure he'll have a handle. I'm sure at some point in the near future, he'll be running pick and rolls as the ball handler. Maybe he's the true unicorn, man. Think about it. He could be the next big thing in terms of.
I'm praying for it. That's a lot of player development has to happen there. Maybe we got some high level trainers have to head over to Cleveland and work with them. But who knows? Maybe that does happen if they have some good coaches. A lot of friends of mine, friends of my show, Gen Z Hoops, Greg, a lot of great assistant coaches that they have there. Maybe they have someone cooking there. Who knows? We'll see what happens there. But so we mentioned Colin Sexton and what he's been doing on the last year of his $6.3 million in the expiring contract for him about to enter into restricted free agency. But also Rubio last year of his $17.8 million contract. So he's getting paid like a starter. He's actually kind of playing like coming off the bench. Would you call him? Where does he rank among the backup point guards in the NBA right now?
Dude, he's among the best. Among the best. As far as backup point guards go, he was a starter. I think this is his. He came off the bench for the Timberwolves last season, but up until then, he was a starter. And honestly, if you go and look at his numbers, he's still producing at a starter level. And he was a starter for the first few games of the season because Garland was on the shelf. So Rubio comes in dropping double-doubles, 10 assists, 12 assists, 10 points, 15 points, hitting threes. I was watching them play the Lakers last night, and he had a couple of off the dribble threes like in a row from the left wing. So I would say he's one of the best. He's one of the very best because he's arguably still a starter level guard. So if you get that off the bench, it's a lot of money for a bench guy, but as a guy that's kind of the bridge between the past era of the Cavs and the new era, he can teach up those guards and kind of show them the way, because not only has he been in the NBA for years, but he's been a professional basketball player since he was like 15 years old. So, he just knows things about the game the other guys don't. So that's going to pay dividends when it comes to these guys' development in the backcourt and even the entire team. They have a lot to learn from him. So I love the signing. We'll see what they do with that space, with that 17 million coming off the books. Some guys are getting paid. Markkanen's still going to be around. As far as Markkanen, were you a fan? I'm just curious of kind of pairing him with those other guys. Do you feel like that's too much of a log jam and it's too much of an investment to make? He's going to be upwards of like 70 million over 4 years. Does it make sense to you to bring him in when you already have Mobley and Allen, who also got paid, as you mentioned earlier?
So we spoke about this on your show a couple of weeks back, and at the time I've always been a little iffy on it, just like everyone else. And I feel most people are a little bit too at some point, talent it's a good thing to have. It's the right players that can play at all these positions, right? The log jam only really exists when guys won't take all their roles, or when there really is no way for them to separate themselves. But on this team, I feel like a couple of guys have, right? We were talking about how Mobley and Jared Allen have kind of separated themselves. I think we need some more games to see what Lauri Markkanen's capable of, if he's able to still do that, because he's one of those guys in this team, right? If he can stretch the floor out for them the way he did in maybe his first year with the Bulls, he's shown flashes of being that kind of guy. And I would argue that last year on the Bulls, he didn't have the ability to really showcase his true self. So that's kind of the thing, is can the Cavs get that out of him? Can they set a lineup up where he can still play a role that he can have the best, show the best version of himself? If they can't, I would say might have taken the L on that one and let Mobley and Jared Allen do their thing, because these guys look so promising right now. But who knows? Maybe they get him rolling too. And then in that point, just the amount of talented bigs you have on your roster, that's got to be a challenge for every big on any given night. You got to go up against those three guys rotating in and out for each other. You never get a break. That's 48 minutes of really torture almost for most big men out there.
For sure, man. That's a great way to look at it. And, a concern of mine when it comes to that lineup is you can't really fit all of them in the starting lineup unless you play Markkanen at the 3, which the Cavs have done a little bit so far, but I'm just not a fan of how that works. Seems clunky to me. They've run it at times. And there's advantages for sure, but I don't know if they outweigh the disadvantages of that kind of lineup. So we'll see how they kind of manage those 3 guys. And if all 3 of them stick around, and let's see what they do with Kevin Love's atrocious, absolutely terrible contract. He still has looking at the money here, I want to say 59, 60 million over the next 2 years. Hopefully by next year, they can get it to a buyout or something like that. But in the meantime, it's definitely a knock on their cap sheet. So, they're still under the tax. That's not an issue for them. But as we get to next season, we'll see what happens with some of the young players and, who they kind of bring in to kind of supplement them, because there's something brewing there. And it's about time, because Cleveland without LeBron has historically been pretty bad. So hopefully this is the start of a new era for them.
They're going to need it to be that, and we'll see if it's able to hold up. And hopefully they don't have to press that reset button the next 2-3 years, and they're able to keep this core together, like you said. That's kind of the biggest thing, is which of these bigs is actually going to stay 2-3 years out from now. Maybe when that buyout happens to Kevin Love, who knows where that money goes towards. We'll have to see where that happens, because if the rest of those pieces can be pretty good, they'll be able to do something really special there. But absolutely, we were talking about maybe Rubio playing like a starting, getting paid like it. Let's go over to this team over there in Charlotte, where they have a guy who's playing like a big, I'll just say big time player. I don't know where that leaves. Let's leave it up to the audience to decide where you maybe have Miles Bridges, or I'll let you decide it for us right now. But he just turned down a 4-year, $60 million deal, because he knows he's about to make a lot more than that. Because I'm just going to take a second to read off some of these numbers of his last 4 games. 31, 6, and 5. With 3 steals on 52% shooting, 25-10 with 2 threes on 50% shooting, 32-9 with 3 threes on 56% shooting, and 37 with 4 threes and 54% shooting. I would say that he's taken, when everyone says, like, will he take that leap? He's always been, I'm mentioning the threes because everyone might just consider him a dunker. He's that guy that finishes LaMelo's nice passes. But right now he's shooting those 3 to 4 threes a game, and he's making them. Shooting 50+% from the field. I would say that quantifies as he's taken that leap, not just to dunk it, but just to be a great player.
Yes, dude. Miles Bridges has been a breath of fresh air for me in fantasy basketball. Drafted him in the later rounds. I feel so good for doing it. A voice in my head was telling me to draft Bridges, man, because I looked at his numbers from last season and I saw the 40% from 3. I saw that he was in the mid-teens for scoring. And then I saw him kind of fill out the stat category in other places too. So that told me that there's something there. There's a breakout ready to happen. And then on top of that, you factor in the deal that he turned down. At the time, I didn't know he turned down a deal, but I knew that he was up for free agency next year. And I knew that, okay, it's a contract year. You know what guys usually do in contract years. They ball out, they want their money. So they kind of transform into like the next level of themselves. And with Bridges, man, like you said it, like the leap has been taken. He's not just a dunking machine. He's not just a guy that runs the floor. He can finish inside the paint. He can shoot the 3 on a lot of attempts, as you mentioned. It's not a low sample as far as threes, and rebounds, defends, does pretty much everything. So he's in line to get probably at least as much as Mikal Bridges got in free agency, if not more, which is it's saying a lot. So kudos to him for betting on himself. Sometimes that's what you have to do as a player. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Like there's cautionary tales like Oladipo and Nerlens Noel or Schroeder where it doesn't work out. But for every case it doesn't, there's a case like here where it does. And I love that for them. This elevates the ceiling for the Hornets. They could be really good and, they can give teams problems even in a playoff scenario. So one of the funnest teams to watch, man. Like, do you have League Pass? Like if you do, you got to check them out. It's a given.
Most people say that when a team's fun to watch, it means they're bad, but this team's actually really, really good. And I have to ask, Aaron, though, is the voice that told you to draft Miles Bridges, the Hornets announcer Eric Collins, going, Bridges? Oh my goodness. Was it not him?
Now that you mention it,
it might have been.
Had a resemblance to Eric Collins. That might be the guy. I just heard that scream. It's like Bridges, just the crazy commentary.
With the hum D at the end, of course. You got to add the hum D in there.
Yeah. I mean, when you have a voice that like emphatic and enthusiastic in your ear, you can't help but listen, he has that effect on people. So I'll give him credit for that one for sure. Shout out to Eric Collins.
Well, it's a great thing that you're able to do that and make that selection, because obviously over the course of 5-6 games now, you made the right call on that one. So just really looking at we've gone through all these teams, so many players, so many teams that really use the salary cap properly, really took advantage of it. And it looks like right now, they're showing off. The Hornets, they might be in this one spot where like they're about to pay, Miles Bridges is about to get paid. So maybe for them, maybe they should have really pushed a deal earlier in the season. But other than that, these teams look, they really made some good calls, and they're about to reap those benefits.
Yeah, one last thing, man. I mean, like you mentioned good calls. I mean, how about these foul calls that are not being called in the NBA this season? Like, if we're gonna do a show and we're gonna talk about what's going on in the NBA today, that's one of the big topics
Oh
is
yeah.
fouls. So, are you a fan of how this has gone down so far with less
Oh yeah.
fouls? I think this is like the least amount of free throws per game in a long time for what I've seen. So I think that's a good thing for the league. How do you feel about that?
I'm a huge fan of it. It's a good thing you brought that up, thinking about it, because a lot of these rule changes is what's causing us to view these contracts in this way, for these stats to even exist. Bo made an interesting, Bo Estes, for those that don't know, but he made a whole post about how it's kind of like it makes you reevaluate all stats. Like that's why era to era, rule change to rule changes, you have to look at, there's so much context that goes in there. We're seeing it from one year to the next. We're seeing it from a 4-month stretch where these rule changes, where maybe you might think of them as, okay, only 1 or 2 players are committing them, it's changing up everything. No, it actually, maybe there's 1 or 2 players that are known for them, but this is just a way that referees call the game that has completely been changed over the last few months. And it is it's not just Harden that's being affected by it, it's every player in the league. We might only look at the guys that we think about and like, okay, that might be the Harden rule for whatever, it hasn't really been coined that, but that's not really what the only person it's affecting. It's affecting everybody. It's affecting Bridges, it's affecting all the Jared Allen, all these guys that maybe in years past would have gotten called for, like, getting called for a foul to a game makes a huge difference. That means whether you're sitting on the bench or you're not. It means it means so much towards your point per game total, or so much towards the flow of the game, especially. And some of these guys, a lot of the guys we're talking about are these look, think about John Morant, Jared Allen. We're talking about Bridges. Like, these are explosive guys that now the game maybe got sped up a little bit for them because the game's not stopping as much for all these foul calls. So who knows? I mean, I think it's great. There's definitely a guy. I mean, once we see more games, we'll be able to see a really big correlation to these rule changes, and also the guys that are playing really well, the guys that are about to sign huge deals. We'll be seeing it all here. We'll be reporting it here on No Trade Clause for sure.
Absolutely. And it's huge for the league, man, in general, because from an entertainment value standpoint, you don't want a ton of stoppages, especially once you get into the fourth quarter and overtime. So less stoppages, that means the pace of the game is better. That means you have more opportunities for, people to kind of tune in and just be involved and feel like they're a part of the game. So I think this is going to do wonders for like the business of the league, not just the on-court product. Viewers, I think, are also, the casual fans are going to enjoy this as well. So, I mean, we talk about money a lot in No Trade Clause. And I think as far as the money for the league, I think it's a great thing because they know that with these rule changes, I mean, sure, there's going to be like guys like Harden that kind of struggle out the gate a little bit, but by and large, you're just going to see the game flow better. And, there's just going to be more action to be kind of take in without things just grinding to a halt. So I love that. And if the NBA could just get rid of the intentional foul call to stop a fast break, then we're really going to be in business. Once they do that, it's a wrap, man. But that's the only nitpick I have. Other than that, great season so far, man. I cannot wait to kind of see how this unfolds.
So much fun. Where do I even begin? This season's going to be special. What a time to do this for the 75th anniversary. And I can't wait. I'm really excited to be doing this here with you, this show. And to really just dive all right into it, whether it's the numbers, whether it's the on the court stuff, whether it's the highlights we'll be watching, consuming, whether it's the full games, we'll be here for it all. And there's no one else I'd rather be doing this journey with. This is going to be a lot of fun, man.
Me too, John. Me too. So I think that about brings us to the end of this episode of No Trade Clause. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we really appreciate your presence here. If you don't mind, go check us out on notradeclause.com. That's where we have all our resources as far as cap sheets, trade machine, draft capital, free agents. We're even getting ready for the next free agent class for next year. So we got you guys covered for anything that's salary cap related, anything front office related in NBA. That's kind of like our calling card, so to speak. And then, of course, we have our social media handles. So if you want to follow us on Instagram, we do have an account for that. So it's going to be No Trade Clause. So if you just hit up No Trade Clause on Instagram, that's going to be our handle for that. And then we also have a Twitter that you guys can use to kind of follow us. And that's where we're going to post graphics. We're going to, have some resources for you guys when big dates are coming up on the calendar. So it's going to be No Trade_Clause on Twitter. That's our handle for that social platform. So once again, we're just glad to be back on the podcast. And we have some really great special guests lined up. I mean, this guy, John, is one of the very best when it comes to networking and just pulling guys in for his podcast. So between the two of us, we're going to have you guys covered for as far as special guests. So keep it locked on No Trade Clause. We're going to be back with more great episodes, more great content as we progress through the NBA's 75th season. So thanks so much for joining us, everybody. And we'll be back next week for another great episode of NTC. So take care, and we'll see you on the next installment.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.